Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Um, yes, I'm still alive. I'm still here. I know I've done nothing on this channel for at least a year. So, yeah, Jane and I are here. Thankfully, my best book two buddy, Lady Jane Books, is here with me to talk books. And I'm going to start out with an apology. Jane, I'm sorry.
It's okay, Carrie.
I'm very sorry.
It's
We
okay.
read The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg, and I had very high hopes for this book.
To be honest, it sounded good. Like the premise sounded good, the write-up sounded good. It has like an average 3-4 star rating, so it sounded good like on the outside. It did. I will give you that, Carrie.
Jane, not a fan of this one. I'm
No.
just right out of the gate. I want to know, what would you rate it?
I actually rated it like a 2.5.
Ooh,
So yeah, that's pretty high. It's pretty, I know it's
okay.
pretty high. It's pretty high. And we'll get into more about why I'm reading this or why I'm rating it this way.
Yeah,
There were parts that I thought were very interestingly done. However,
yeah,
as a whole, unfortunately, I don't think it always came together, and there were some kind of severe problems with it. So, for what it did well, I thought it did very well, but I think it was just a different type of book that maybe didn't meet our needs as readers personally.
yeah. Um, so the premise of this book is following our protagonist Claire, who just lost her husband in a horrific car accident. She is traveling to Havana because her husband was a professor. Is that
Hmm.
correct?
Yep,
Yeah, I
and
think he was
horror
a
film fanatic. Yep.
horror film fanatic. I think he was a film professor, but his particular interest was horror films. And so they had both planned to go to this horror film festival in Havana. And so she is doing that. And she sees someone who she thinks might be her dead husband. So,
See that sounds phenomenal, doesn't it, Carrie? Like that
doesn't it?
automatically sounds like it's really good. Like that's the
I'm
hook that
hooked.
kind
I'm
of
in.
got us. Yeah, like I can see why we picked it or why you picked it from that hook. I totally give you credit on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I will say, Jane, when I read this book, I got to the end of it and I was stunned. I was like, is that really the end of the book? Like, what did I just read?
Yeah.
What happened here? And so, for me to make sense of this book, I sat down a few days after I read it and I made like a little mind map
Wow.
of just thoughts about this book. And it's pretty chaotic. And I will say that's very similar to this book.
Yeah.
What was your initial reaction when you finished the book? What were your first thoughts about it?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. I started this, I think, like May like 17th or something, 15th or 17th. And I got about halfway through and it was pretty good paced. But I'll be totally honest, I just finished it like about an hour ago. And no, and I think so at first I was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. Like, there's a novelty of it, of the way it was written and about this character and about, something you felt like something was going to be set up. But then by the end, I was a little like, did we have to go through all of this as readers? So my very first thought was, thank God it's over, to be honest. But on second thought, I did mull a little bit. I didn't make a mind map, but I did mull it over a little bit, and I can see how this book is an art piece. And like
Yeah.
anything else, art is very subjective.
Yeah.
And I just kind of came to the conclusion that this art piece wasn't for me, but that didn't necessarily make it a bad art piece. So that was kind of my revelation and my like thought at the very end. But
Okay.
mostly I looked forward to talking to you about it because I know that you always have really good theories and like discussion points. So for that, it was worth reading. So
Any excuse for us to get together, to be honest. for
Yeah.
sure. I liked your description there, though, calling it an art piece because I think you're onto something with that. I do think this book was kind of trying to be that. It was trying to be an art piece. It was trying to be something that would elicit theories and different thoughts and kind of those existential sort of questions because our main character Claire, she is um, someone who works for an elevator
Elevators.
company.
Yep, elevator company. Yep.
And so she travels all around the United States, primarily in the Midwest, which I thought was an interesting choice because they reference Nebraska a lot.
Yes.
And yeah, I thought that was kind of a cool thing because I could really picture when she talked about the hotels in Nebraska and how kind of plain and sterile and kind of anonymous they were. I could really relate to that. I think hotels, a lot of hotels are that way.
Definitely.
They are very, very much anonymous. But she was able to literally pick up pieces of people's lives that had passed
Mhm.
through these hotels. And the one thing that she came across that really made an impact on her because she kept talking about it was a fingernail. She found a fingernail underneath the bed and she put it in the side table in this hotel room because she just couldn't bring herself to throw it away for some reason. And this led to her peering under the beds of these hotel rooms. What did you make of that?
I think it I think a big part of this story is kind of the curiosity of other people. And I think, especially within Claire's existence, she's very like we're in kind of like her experience of what's going on. So like obviously she has some trauma, she has a lot of things going on. And so we're seeing that she's very singularly. And so I think the idea with the fingernail was kind of that hint that as much as we're in Claire's consciousness, this exact same thing may be happening to other people that we have no idea about. And that's kind of like the paradox of consciousness. Everything is so centralized. Everything's like about us and about our experiences. And that's entirely what the book is. But the fingernail is kind of the hint that it's that outside element that somebody else was here and what was their story? Did their husband die? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of that hint that as much as we're wrapped up in Claire, there's it's almost like a parallel universe in a way, but the parallel universe is consciousness, if that makes sense, of another person. So that's what I kind of took it to be.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I kind of related to that. Not that I have kept any weird fingernails or anything.
Really, Carrie? I thought it was just
um,
me. Wow, you got to
yeah,
get in on
I
this.
have a drawer of no. Um, but I've
Just
always been
kidding.
very curious about people's lives. Like,
Yeah.
when you drive, I think this is kind of a human thing. Like when you're driving down the road or you're walking down the street and you pass random people, sometimes you just have a thought like, I wonder what that person's life is like. Like, I wonder what their story is. And so I think that's kind of part of Claire um, Claire's, psyche as well. And I think the hotel just kind of brings it to the forefront because, think about it. In a hotel, you are kind of stripped of all the extra things,
All
right?
the relationships.
Um,
Yeah, with
yeah,
the
all the
like
relationships,
and the
all the
roles, like,
personality,
daughter, mother, sister,
yeah, all of the
spouse.
things that make you you are essentially not there, right?
Right,
So,
right.
in your house, like behind you, Jane, your books and your lovely library there, like you don't have those things when you're in a hotel. So it kind of strips you bare a little bit. And
Hmm.
so that was really interesting for me. I kind of liked that. I wrote something down on this mind map, and I don't know if I'm assuming it's a quote from the book. Just it has to be. It says, "The traveler is not a peaceful presence."
Hmm. I did remember that quote as well.
What do
What
you
do you
think of
think of
that?
So I think it's also when we strip those little bits of ourselves away, then we kind of get really down to like the bare bones, so to speak. And it's the idea that there's really nowhere to hide, there's nowhere to distract you, there's no comfort in like your routines or anything like that. And you really kind of get a peek as to, well, if I lived here, what would my life would be? Or would I have met this person if I had stayed home or something like that? So I do think, and it's kind of like an assault on the senses continuously there because again, you're out of your element. You know what I mean? You're out of the comfort of your routines. So that's kind of what I thought a little bit, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Um, very much what you said. But also I feel like, adding to that, you're taken out of your element. So
Mhm.
it's kind of a little bit of instability there.
Right.
And I feel like the instability is a theme that is throughout this book because she experiences the loss of her husband, and but even before that I think there seems to be some
Strife.
instability and strife in her marriage, and so things are kind of always shifting. And I think um we're all travelers, right? When you get down to it, not to get
Hmm.
too deep here, but like we're all travelers in this world, right? We're only
Totally.
here for a finite time, and things do change, right? They change all too frequently, and that can create a sense of, what's the word I'm looking for, Jane?
Existentialism?
Yeah, yeah, and she is kind of ate up with it.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about whether you thought this was a ghost story or not.
So I'm actually really glad that you said that because one of my other thoughts at the end, um, it's kind of a really interesting way that the story set itself up because you can almost argue that it is. And I almost thought at the end, I was like, wait a minute, are these just all like, other people who've come into the hotel? Has she passed away? And she's kind of jumping consciousness and that actually would make a lot of sense because of how often she interrupts like her own story to talk about like, well, the woman with the baby across the way is this, and you kind of get this split idea of she's telling you her story, but there's these very real time things that are going on and like people disappear and things like that. Like you can't track down the actress very well and you can't track down the husband very well. So I almost kind of wondered if this was a very non-linear ghost story, and that she's passed away and she's kind of in this realm of, I don't want to say like parallel universes, but for lack of a better word, like parallel universes, like where these souls go when they have unfinished business. And and especially with the end and the non-linear like father thing and the note and the book and jumping back and forth, and is the husband present, is he not? I do think you could definitely argue that this is a ghost story, and I think that she may be a ghost in and of herself, this, and she's kind of going through a strange transition process for ghosts.
Yeah, the two words I wrote down were grief and ghost.
Yeah.
And for me, kind of the transition point was that weird wellness health hotel.
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah.
remember?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's like everybody's
so
dressed the same and
everyone's
yeah, it
dressed
was
the
odd.
same, and everyone at this wellness place is essentially a patient except for her and Richard. And for me that kind of seemed like maybe the transition between life and death, because
Mm.
that's where she really connects with Richard again.
Right.
That's where
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
intimate again, and like they cut each other's hair, and there's some levels of intimacy there that we don't see. And he's very sketchy, like he doesn't answer any of the questions about like where he's been, what he's been doing. um is he dead? Like, he doesn't answer any of those basic questions you would
You
think.
think you would, yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, it was almost like he's dead.
Yeah.
She keeps following him, and he doesn't want her to because he knows if she follows him, she will be dead as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at
And
the
that's kind
end
of
of the
why,
book,
sorry to interrupt. And that's
no,
also
no,
kind of why he disappears so much at the beginning of the book, that she can't really catch up with him because she's not really there yet. But then
yeah,
having that interaction is like, okay, you've crossed over now. So
yeah.
go ahead, Carrie.
Um,
Sorry.
and then at the end, her father's question was, "Where have you been?" Now, her father has dementia, right? So I don't
Mhm.
really think I'm kind of spoiling something here, but I don't really think it's
There's
a
nothing to
major
spoil,
spoiler
to be honest.
because there's really no like uh,
Plot. There's really not a plot
critical
going on.
plot,
Yeah.
you know. So, but her father ask her, "Where have you been?" And for me, I'm not really sure because I have two theories. My first theory is that she could have died, right? She could have almost died, but she didn't, right? Because she didn't stay with Richard in that weird health spa. And so she's alive. Or she is dead, her father is dead, Richard is dead, and her father's like, "Where have you been? Like, I've already been here, I've been waiting on you," sort of thing.
Well,
Um,
actually, going off of that thought, I have heard some, I don't know if they're true, okay, they're just internet things that I've read, but I have heard some stories about people towards the end of their life seeing, the image of people who have passed on before them. And it's a phenomenon that people like reach out and hug or say, "Oh, grandma was here and grandma's been dead for 50 years," or something like that. Um, and so I kind of took it to be that phenomenon where he's so far into dementia and it's quite obvious that he is going to pass away pretty soon, that, she may be that specter that,
oh,
that he's seeing now that he's kind of
gosh.
really close to death in himself. So that's kind of what I thought too, where I was like, this might be one of those, those type of things. Look it up. It's very interesting to read about, but I've heard that a lot of people
Yeah,
experience it, when they see people who are actively passing away.
I've heard that too. And there's a lot of, when people have like near death experiences or those experiences at the end of life where they do see loved ones. I think there is, you know, maybe some science behind it where there are some things like your memories are being recalled or something. And then there are of course some people who believe that there is a supernatural aspect to that,
Mhm.
right, kind of signifying an afterlife or that sort of thing. um Gosh, I do feel like that's what we just did right there with our theories about, was she alive, was she dead, was Richard alive, I think that's what she wanted us to do in this book. I
Yes,
think that's
I
what
think
that's
so too.
exactly what the
I
author.
think so too.
So mission accomplished. She definitely did that.
I think also there's this interesting, I don't know if it's before part one or part two, but there's this really interesting line that he said, the filmmaker, not the husband, but the filmmaker she's basically stalking around Havana, um, says like the true horror is when you don't know it's a horror. Because when you go into it knowing it's a horror, then you're not scared because you already
Yeah,
like your consciousness is just like, oh, this is something
you're
big.
expecting it. Hmm.
Yeah, but when the horror is unexpected, that's what makes it scarier. So I do kind of think that the author is playing that on us, that we're just like, huh? And then we don't realize until we talk about it that we're like, oh, wait, this is actually terrifying or, something interesting. But I also think that could have signified kind of her transition as well, that you don't know if she's dead or not dead until like the end, and you're not expecting it because of the way the story was set up so well. So in that regard, but that's why I'm saying this is an art piece. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
to me is like literary art to do. So
Well, Jane, don't hate on this book so much because I think that it is prompting lots of discussion. So
yeah.
it is a good buddy read in that regard. Whether you enjoyed it or not, I'm sorry.
I
But you
didn't
can,
I think I didn't enjoy it while I was reading it actively, but I
yeah,
do enjoy talking about it. And I think
talking
that's
about it.
yeah, I think honestly if I read it on myself, but read it by myself, I would have kind of written this off. But I do think
Yeah,
like any other good art piece, this book is meant to be discussed like this. And I think that's the
yeah,
experience that is good. It makes it a little bit more valuable for me.
yeah. I totally agree. Um, I do like the kind of thread of the hotel. So when she goes to
Mm.
Cuba, she gets dropped off at the wrong hotel and she has to tell him he tells her it's the third hotel down or something. But that is technically the third hotel we've really talked about because she grew up in a hotel. Basically,
Mhm.
her parents ran a hotel in Florida. Then she talks about all the hotels she stayed in, right? That they all kind of look the same, right? So it's all really the same hotel. And then this hotel in Cuba. What did you think of the setting of Cuba for
So
the majority?
So one thing I think the author did very well was write about setting, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like you felt the heat, you felt like her on the street, you felt the acrid air, you felt, the vibrance of the city that she's in. I will say I absolutely love the way she wrote the scenes themselves because it sounded like a film. Like to me, I could definitely see this being a film. I wanted to say it's almost like a mix of an A24 film, but also a Hitchcock, because we do
Yeah.
get a lot of Hitchcock references in this book too, which I got really, really excited about. Um, but um, I do truly love the way she wrote about the scenes. Like even just the quiet one, like, oh, I was walking up the road and like you could just imagine like the dulled colors and Technicolor with the grainy film and the silence. It was very artistically done. And I I that's a big factor of when I was rating this book, that I was like, she does this very well. She really writes a tone, and you can kind of see the film in your head, in your mind for it. So, I love the way that she described this Havana and Cuba and everywhere.
Yeah, it was very atmospheric and like you said, very cinematic. There was a lot of cinematic language, so I could
Absolutely,
definitely see this in film and I'm a big film noir fan and it kind of had that because it wasn't like obviously a slasher.
no,
Even though it talks about horror films and that sort of thing, it wasn't a slasher, it wasn't a monster movie, but it had that air of mystery and she was like a detective. I mean, she was having to track down her dead husband. Um and so yeah, I think she did that really well. Um the story, the marriage, and the book all felt a little bit unfinished for me.
yeah, I
And
agree.
I don't know if that's the point. Like, is that the point that, this main character is having regrets about her marriage, and regrets about her life and wondering about the life she didn't choose and what ifs and um maybe that's the point.
Yeah,
But
that like life is
um
unfinished no matter when you pass away.
yeah. There was something else that came up that I was really fascinated with. And it was when she talked about wanting to be married and also wanting to leave.
Yeah,
Wanting two opposite things really simultaneously. Um, what do you make of that with this character?
I'll be totally honest. I actually didn't feel very connected to Claire at all. And I think that's honestly why I struggled with reading the book,
Yeah.
through and through, or quickly, I should say. Um, she does, and that maybe the author did that on purpose because, again, if she's dead, then, she's not wholly human anymore. So, maybe that there's an importance to that. But I think I think that kind of just points to the illogical sense of kind of her struggle, that, she wants to find Richard, but she may have not liked Richard at the end. She wants to go be with her father when he passes away, but she doesn't want to face this, so I
Yeah.
don't know if that's, kind of these two. If we're presuming that she's dead, that makes sense. You know what I mean? That you can hold
Yeah.
this, because I think as humans we're so polarized and being like, no, you either want to be with your husband or you don't. And I
Right.
think in a spirit it was like, well, I could be or I could not be. You know what I mean? Because the metaphysics of being human are gone. You know what I mean? So that, I think that that may have been kind of a nod to she's not really in a human state right now. And I think that also the way that she's just describing things, like this jumping around and kind of the unfinished, like some of this like sentences they just felt unfinished. Like some of her little paragraphs or little inner monologues just felt unfinished. That would actually really lend itself to the idea that she's no longer fully human.
I wrote down a couple words. I put tone,
Mm.
anonymity. Like the
Mm.
tone seemed very anonymous, and I think that's kind of what you were getting at with not feeling that connection with
Yeah.
Claire. I didn't really feel a huge connection with her as a character, but I felt very connected to some of her experiences or some of the things that she said,
Yes.
like the thing in the hotel about wondering about the other people, right? That's something that I do. Um, Talking about, she talked about the kind of secret self,
Hmm.
like the part of her that Richard didn't know about, and the part of her that she kind of hid from him because it was, embarrassing. Um, weird things that she would do, like eating a quesadilla in a hotel bathtub and,
And
bringing that book along everywhere, but never finishing it, but
yeah.
telling everyone, "I'm almost done with this book," or "I read it," little things like that. I
Or,
mean,
like,
some of
lying
them were
about her
weird.
name everywhere and, like, she was never, like
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. So there was kind of that element of like anonymity and um the travel piece in it, I think adds to that. And it's weird because like when you when you travel, you do meet people, right? So she is meeting with people, she's connecting with people, and she's having experiences with them. And sometimes, you're really physically close to people that you're traveling around. Like, think about it.
Yeah.
You take a flight somewhere, you might literally fall asleep beside or on top of, sometimes you accidentally
We've all
lay
done
your
it.
head
We've
on
all
the
done it.
person,
No shame.
a complete stranger. And, most of the time it's people don't even say anything about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this unspoken thing of we all know there are things that, you know, we do as humans
Yeah.
or whatever. And so there's kind of a little bit of grace there for that. But and we don't talk about them. But in this, she talks about them, right? She just talks about all of the kind of secret things. I don't know why I'm calling them secret because it's,
No, it is. It's yeah.
but it's not like a big C. It's just like your
Yeah.
humanness,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
And I think also her relationship with Richard hints to that as well, because there are parts of it that you feel like you don't really know what's going on with Richard, and she doesn't know what's going on with Richard. And so I think that's kind of the idea that as much as it's happening to her, she sees it also in other people as well.
Yeah. Um, Trying to see what else I've written on this very chaotic sheet of paper here,
Okay.
Jane.
I have to say, I
Um,
loved the kind of Hitchcock references, if we want to dive into that a little bit.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that.
So obviously, this one of my favorite films is Vertigo, directed by
Okay.
Alfred Hitchcock. And this
Yep.
one has a very similar feeling to it, where she's roaming around the city. She's kind of stalking the ghost of her husband. And those are themes that are very, very similar to Vertigo, where the main character is investigating this woman and he's following around the city and she's very ghost like. And I've discussed this before on social media. It's really interesting. And so kind of the whole idea that a lot of and I think she said that the husband liked Hitchcock at one point, like the film. And so we kind of see this, there are a lot of these little references to like a lot of Hitchcock films, like the kind of ghostliness and about the kind of stalking and not really knowing what's happening with somebody and not being too close, but still having to observe them. That's in Vertigo. There's also this idea that she looks out of windows a lot. And like, there's been a couple of times where she's like, I've looked out and I saw the man reading a book, in his apartment or
Rear
things like that.
Window.
And yeah, and that's Rear Window, right? Isn't that cool?
That's
Um,
one of my all-time favorite films, but I didn't
Mine
even
too.
put that together, Jane. So I'm glad you
Mine
mentioned
too.
that.
And, like, he was
Yeah.
there and then he wasn't there, so it's talking about how you're saying that this is kind of a film noir book. You see a
Yeah.
these things. I'm sure there are others. It honestly just clicked for me when I read about the Rear Window references. Um, and then, of course, like I think the Hotel by the Sea or something, that's kind of like a reference to Psycho, this kind of imposing like hotel figure with the family. So I do see a lot of, I would want to go back and kind of see if I can pinpoint it. And honestly, just kind of her monologue and these travel things and this like hopping around. I think just very reminiscent to a lot of his work and a lot of the feelings that his films have. And so I did know at the time that like this is very Hitchcock-esque just from the tone of it. It's hard to put into words, but I'm sure you know what I'm saying. Like the
Yeah.
opening scenes of Marnie is she's traveling and she's like changing identities and she's you've seen it, Marnie?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's very similar to what she's doing and like kind of having these
Yeah.
secrets. Yep. So I kind of see this as a meld of a bunch of like Hitchcock works too. So I thought that was very clever. That was very, very clever. So
It's so funny because this is the second book we've read this year that has film references.
mhm.
Um, My Heart is a Chainsaw. Do we even want to mention that one? But uh, at
Please
least
no.
this, at least this one did it smartly.
Yeah.
Like this was a little bit, well, a lot more, I think, sophisticated in kind of giving a nod to those things.
Right.
Whereas, My Heart is a Chainsaw, we got kind of beat over the
We
head
got it. We got a
with the
first page
slasher
and then yeah.
references. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really like the fact that some of those references and nods to that I didn't even get until you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
So
I honestly didn't get it until I read the Rear Window thing where she was watching like the guy and like all this stuff and these other like windows around. And then I thought back and I was like, oh, this is like a Hitchcock like
yeah.
melding. So, and I thought that was cool. And in that regard, I'd rather want to read it again. But like I had like the theme song of Vertigo playing in my head when I read this. I had some of the theme songs of Marnie, and it fit. You know what I mean? It really, really fit, especially with how she was describing the setting and the atmosphere of wandering around in the city. It fit. It fit very well. So
Yeah. Um yeah, the setting of Cuba uh was really cool for me. I don't know if maybe, because Cuba's kind of, there's a bit of an antiquated feel, to Cuba, kind of the old
mm,
world
yeah,
feel, and the old cars, and
yeah,
technology can be spotty sometimes there, and so um, yeah, I don't know that the Cuban setting was, I think, key to that atmosphere in this book.
I agree. I agree, and that would also fit with Hitchcock if it's very like old world too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It would
Yeah,
fit.
that's kinda what I was trying to say, like, it's from that same era, like,
Yeah,
when we think of Cuba, I think a lot of people in their mind, now, of course, they're much more modern now than they were in the '50s and '60s, but I think when you think of Cuba and you think of kind of the historic sites there, and the cars there, you're thinking of the '50s and the '60s, you're thinking of that black and white era. I don't
mhm,
know, when I conjure up like an image of it, I think of '50s and '60s, and I think of um, the beach, and I think of um, those classic cars and all the different
yep,
colors. There's certain imagery that I
yeah,
think always comes to mind with
yeah,
Cuba. But it's funny because, before this book, if I thought of Cuba, I would think of that time, but I would also think of just how vibrant it is, how alive, how happy, you're
mm,
at the beach. Like it would be, that would be kind of some of the images that would come to mind. And this book it definitely was not like a beach getaway. It was not,
No, no, it was very
um
interesting that she picked that too. Yeah, very, very
yeah.
interesting.
But, then too, because Cuba, obviously, there's the dark side, right? There's the, you know, kind of dark undercurrent that we have there of, communist dictatorship and, what has happened, um, with, people's rights there. And so, you do have kind of anonymity there because, with the Castro regime, you had, you know, basically spies, intelligence, so there is a bit of that like kind of detective, secretive sort of undercurrent in Cuba. So it would be a good place, I suppose, for Richard to fly under the radar.
I was just actually looking up something pertinent to this.
Oh,
Hang on one sec.
I don't know that the tourist lens though kind of
Yeah. No,
allows her
I
to
was
be
gonna
anonymous.
I was gonna look up if it actually says what era that this was, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, and I think that's kind of the nice part too, is that if she doesn't give you an era for this could be timeless, which also means it could be the spirit realm as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
was trying to see if there was like a year that she set the book, but I didn't see it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I can't remember. I assume she talked about, like, cell phones and stuff. I
Well,
feel like she did.
funny thing about phones. Do you remember when the reference to the phone ringing in the hotel with Richard? And she picked it up and she's like, I swear it was my voice. And then the phone
Yeah.
rings at the father's twice. And I'm like, that's interesting. Right?
Yeah.
At the very end,
That
the phone rings twice again.
that would kind of tell me maybe, like, concurrent timelines, like, concurrent,
Yeah. Well,
um,
well, I think,
worlds,
yeah, well, I think that means she's in the spirit realm now. And that was her like liveness. You see what I mean? Because if
Yeah.
she's like, she picked up and she's like, oh, I swear it was my voice. But
Oof.
you know what I mean? So, but
And
then,
it was in that wellness hotel.
right.
It goes back to that's, like, the transition.
Yeah. So I just thought about that too because I wanted to ask you about the phone ringing as well because I don't remember any other cell phones or anything like that, no service or
Yeah.
anything. I oh wait, she does have email though. She did have email and then she said she was fired, right? When she went back.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
So
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I remember because I remember them talking about, like,
yeah, that she checked email
service being
eventually.
service is kinda spotty in Cuba, like, the internet is,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think that's accurate, like, I think
Yeah.
there
And then
are
she
places where
got
you can't really
fired.
get it.
Yeah. At the end she's like, oh, I'm no longer an employee at this place because I've dipped for 2 weeks. So
Yeah,
yeah. So there is that, but again, that might be her again coming to more like the physical realm to meet with the father. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure.
Could be.
Oh, man, now I'm just, like, thinking even more
Now,
about
yeah,
this,
now like this book is getting better rated. Now
This book is best, so now that we've talked about it, now does it come up from the 2.5 rating you gave it at the beginning?
I'm gonna give it a solid maybe 3.5. I don't know if I can go 4. I don't know if
Oh,
I can do it, but I'm gonna give it a
okay.
3.5. But I definitely think this is a book that you need to have conversations like this in order to
Yeah,
appreciate.
yeah,
If you read it on its own, then it's still like a 2. But if you
okay.
have conversations about it and then appreciate it and let it kind of marinate and discuss it like we are now, then I can say, all right, this is a 3.5.
Before this, I would have said it was a 3 for me. Now, I'm gonna say it's a 4.
Well, all
Just
right.
just because of the conversation, or
Yeah.
maybe a 3.75.
Okay. Well, how about I'll do that? 3.75. I can do that. Yeah.
3.75. That's our
3.75.
compromise.
All right. Sounds good. I can agree
I
with that one.
yeah, I agree with that.
I did
Um,
really like just the tone of the stories. I liked, the settings. I like the tones. I kind of like the atmosphere of it. So for that
yeah,
alone, that's kind of what got its 2.5. But now talking about it and these themes and things, then it totally deserves the 3.75 in my opinion.
yeah.
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 Totally.
Wow. Great. I think we came to a really good conclusion on this one, Jane. This
Can you
worked out
say we
better than I thought
came
it
full circle?
would.
Get it? Get it? Like the third
Yeah.
hotel? Bad
I
joke.
think we did. I think we did. So is there anything else you'd like to add about The Third Hotel by Laura
Nope.
Van
I do think that I think if somebody wants to read it like we did today. Like, you may not get it, it definitely is, as I said at the beginning, an art piece. So if you read it, just kind of go into it knowing that. Maybe you'll get a lot of the themes that we talked about on your own, maybe not. But I do think the value of the book is discussing it and then talking about the ideas with a friend. And I think then
Yeah.
you're going to really enjoy it much more like we did here.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a buddy read or a maybe a book club read for the right book club. I don't think this is like your standard book club read, you know, folks reading chick lit or anything like that. I don't think this is for that. But yeah, the tone, the atmosphere was great. I like that they picked Cuba, even though typically in my mind, scary places are cold. You
Yeah.
know, scary places are typically cold, but there again, there's something because of Cuba's history. There's something very mysterious. You know, it harkens back to Cold War era and espionage, and noir because she's kind of this detective along the way. And so, yeah, I think it was a good little trip for us. It was trippy.
I think it definitely was, but I totally appreciated reading it with you and discussing it.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, for joining me today. And I will let you pick our next buddy read. How about that?
All right, I got some ideas, so I'm excited for it. I'm
Okay,
excited to see what you think.
perfect. All right, guys. See you next time.
Bye.